Maluku Podcast.
What's good, everyone? Ghazali Ohorella here with a COP26 daily update, day 7, while I'm eating a banana. So if you don't know, like, there's little time to, if you have any, to grab a lunch, or like a very good lunch. So my hosts were fortunate. Well, not. They were great enough to give me send me off with two two bananas. So this is one that I ate in the morning, and then there's another one that I'm having right now. Apologize for that. But because it has been a very long and intense day. For those that are keeping score, it took me approximately 15 minutes to get into the venue this time around. Mainly because it is week number 2. Week number 2 of the COP26 usually means that it's now most of the issues, most of the items are now in the hands of ministers, the heads of delegations, the actual lead negotiators. Which also means that there's a lot of new people that try and sign up to go in. So it takes a little bit more time to enter the venue. So hopefully tomorrow it'll be okay again, and we'll be able to probably to break that record of 15 minutes and make it into 10. Who knows? But you're not here to listen to my scoreboard, I would say, in terms of getting into the COP26, however, but actually to what developments of today. Aside from a very important person, apparently the former president of the United States, Barack Obama, made it to COP26. Nobody know. Well, we don't know why, because but there was a lot of people that wanted to see him. There were a lot of things going on behind the scenes. So last week was mostly focused on technical issues, meaning that the experts were doing the negotiations, which also means that most of the negotiations that were ongoing we could follow. We could be part of the what it's called the informal meetings. As observers, as indigenous peoples, we are observers, so we could observe the meeting and then strategize accordingly. That obviously has ended on Saturday. And this week is the ministerial meeting, the political meeting. It doesn't have any informals. So for us to be able to influence the decision-making processes, influence Article 6, influence loss and damage, and all other processes that are still ongoing that are not finished yet, it's up to us to set up bilateral meetings. Bilateral meetings, what that means is the meetings that you set up between you, like formal meetings, formally informal meetings between you as Indigenous Peoples constituency with parties or member states in this case. So that for 2 reasons, or at least 2 reasons. One is to figure out what the landscape is, like where things are at, what the which state is saying what is being discussed, which option is off the table, or which option is being put on the table. So that's one thing. So you want to become more smarter. That's, and in my view, that's one of the if not the most important part of these bilaterals of negotiations, is to become smarter. So I would say almost like 60 to 80% of your time in bilateral meetings should be dedicated to gain intelligence, to become smarter, so that you can make moves that are informed and not just based on assumptions. The other part of bilateral meetings is also to convey your position, your message, what you want that particular state to do. What do you want them to stand in front of, for example, human rights? You want them to protect it? Or do you just want them to become vocal, that they that they say something about it, or do you want them to become vocal and to ask other parties to say something about it? So there are many flavors that you can choose from, and it all depends on the historical support that, or this historical context, or the historical the history that you have as indigenous peoples with that particular state, that actually determines how you approach that particular conversation. Your conversation, for example, with Guatemala or Mexico or New Zealand or Australia or Panama or Costa Rica or Ecuador are different than you set up a meeting with, for example, China, Russia, the UK, France, you name it. Every country has a historical, has a history with indigenous peoples, good or bad. But it is very important to be aware of that history so that you can use that as quote unquote leverage in that particular conversation. Because indigenous peoples, we don't have economical leverage, or are we, in terms of horse trading or bargaining chips, it is important that we engage in good faith, for one, but also in protection of the human rights of indigenous peoples, the rights of indigenous peoples. So we use the historical relationship as leverage, and I would say, in terms of the negotiations. Just giving a good example is that, for example, we had a bilateral meeting with the European Union, and it's important that as the Sami indigenous peoples are the only recognized indigenous peoples of the European Union, that you bring them to the table. Actually, and this is like kind of protocol with the IIPFCC, or the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change, is that for those bilaterals to be set up, I should not be setting up those meetings as lead negotiator for indigenous peoples with all these countries just by myself. It is important that if I want to meet with the European Union, that I ask the Sami if they want to set up a meeting with the European Union, and not that I take the lead in that conversation, but that they take the lead, and that I'm there for technical support to fill any gaps that may arise or that need to be filled. Same thing with Australia. If there's a bilateral meeting that's set up with the Australian government, I ask one of our colleagues or one of our relatives that are from Australia, or what we now know as Australia, to set up the meeting and ask if I can be part of that conversation. And that is how we mostly set up these bilateral meetings, so that we gain insight into the negotiations, that we gain insight into how they see things develop for the next couple of days, and also how they see how our priorities fit within the current landscape, within the current dynamics of negotiations. So that is why it is important that is right now that we as indigenous peoples set up bilateral meetings. So today what we did was, first of all, we coordinated. We organized a coordination meeting to, all right, this is what we know so far. And these are potential scenarios that may arise from the information that we have so far, but it is important to become smarter. So to know instead of like to assume things. So that's why we set up bilaterals, but also there's a lot of parties that require a language, what are the indigenous priorities in all this. And a very important tool that was mentioned by Ariel of Indigenous Climate Action was to what we used in Paris, the one-pager document. So not like a booklet, but a one-pager, and just straight to the point. This is our position on Article 6. And not go into like wordsmithing or like this is the actual text that we want, but more in bullet point. This is what we need, and this is what we need. So, and also that leverage that we talked about, and I think the key word in all this is consistency. Parties or states have interests and are part of the UN, not only here in Glasgow, but also in New York or in Geneva. And many of these parties, they all contributed to the adoption of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was adopted in 2007 with an overwhelming majority, 144 in favor, 11 abstained, and 4 against. And the 4 that voted against turned their position into political support to the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So in 2007, states committed to the rights of Indigenous peoples. In addition to that, in 2014, through the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples outcome document, states recommitted to the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So you have the commitment and recommitment of states. In addition to that, these states have been part of the Group of Friends in Geneva or in New York, have been very vocal in terms of supporting the rights of Indigenous peoples. But what they do in Geneva and in New York is actually contrary to what they do here in Glasgow, which is mostly silent. So in terms of leverage, in terms of convincing parties of their human rights obligations, we tell them that they need to be consistent. That they need to be consistent across the board throughout the UN about their human rights obligations. Well, you could say, well, Ghazali, then doesn't this go without saying? Well, the thing is that most of these party representatives are not human rights experts. They've been flown in from the capitals, focused on climate, on environment, but they're not experts in human rights. So most part of these bilateral meetings is also capacity building, that we actually have to explain to these experts or to these representatives what their human rights commitments, obligations are on the rights of Indigenous, in international law, on the rights of Indigenous people, the Declaration. So that's what we have to do, and that is something that we included in the one-page position paper that we produced, that as a lead-in, that because of their existing human rights obligations and their support for the rights of Indigenous peoples, based on that, we recall them or to reaffirm that those obligations through supporting the human rights safeguards in 6.2, 6.4, and 6.8, through ensuring that under 6.4 activity design, that any consultation, and I know we don't like that word as Indigenous peoples, but let's run with it for now, that any consultation that takes place, that it is in accordance or is going to be done in accordance with the right to free prior from consent, the right to self-determination of Indigenous peoples. The current text says that consultation should occur in accordance with domestic arrangements. Now, to give you an idea, just to let you know that the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is not a domestic arrangement. It is an international standard. It is a minimum standard of Indigenous peoples. And so only referring to domestic arrangements would actually exclude the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It would exclude the rights of self-determination. It would exclude the right to free prior from consent. So it is very important that the right to free prior from consent is reflected in the text. So what do? Do you include the word free prior from consent, or do you try to include language that says according to domestic arrangement and international standards. So those are some of the important changes that we need to see reflected. Again, we're talking about minimum standards here, safeguards that need to be built into the text of Article 6. It is not the case that this particular text of Article 6 that we're negotiating right now for multiple years, that it will be reopened and or reviewed or reassessed every year. This article, once it's locked, once it's done, it will remain there out in the public as guidelines, as part of the doctrine or part of the regime, I would say, for climate action in terms of international cooperation for decades. It will remain here for 30, 40, maybe even 50 years before we start to revisit the Paris Agreement. So it is very important right now that these human rights safeguards are built in to the document. Another point that we brought forward is obviously this grievance mechanism. This, in terms of the grievances, and we've learned that from the clean development mechanism, the REP Plus, that there needs to be a strong grievance mechanism built into the text. Right now, as the text says, that the grievance may be submitted to the superior body, which is a super conflict of interest. So there needs to be an independent grievance mechanism built into the text. What is also from a practical point of view, these activities are international cooperation between states and entities. There'll be lots of them, like hundreds of them. And this sustainable development mechanism that is going to oversee that these activities are done in line with what's been agreed to in Article 6. It's like it'll be hundreds of these activities that the sustainable development mechanism will have to go through, and it is is what we believe, is that no way that they can, on top of that, also do the grievance mechanism or deal with the grievances. So I asked in a bilateral meeting with a number of states today, like, how do you see this superior body? How do you see it function in terms of the grievance mechanism, in terms of grievances? And most parties that I've spoken to today and the last couple of days didn't have an idea. They didn't know, like, all right, they didn't know how it will deal with grievances. So that, if that is their answer, what was interesting was that once you come up with this independent grievance mechanism, that they say, yeah, you might be right on that one. And that is, there went a little bit of tactics went before it, when I went on beforehand, as in I was asking some calibrated questions. Actually, instead of like, we want an independent grievance mechanism, my question was, well, how do you see all this play out? How do you see this superior body do all this in terms of grievance? And they didn't know it. So I don't know. Well, doesn't an independent grievance mechanism make sense? Actually, it does, because there's conflict of interest. Now, convincing your counterpart at the table is one thing, but actually making them say it out loud or propose it into the negotiations is another thing. So it is. That's why this one-page document is super important. That you, bring that. That you. Man, there's so many things in my head going right now. Let me get back to it in a little bit. So that's what you do in these bilateral meetings. That is what you do. throughout the day today. In terms of timeline, today and tomorrow are key in terms of setting up bilateral meetings, because the closer we get to the final deadline, which is supposedly Friday, the more difficult it will be to make any significant changes. So you go into those meetings and you state your minimum standard. You don't call it red line, but you want to flip it into its positive iteration. I said, these are our minimum standards. The human rights safeguards are minimum standard. Consultation in accordance with FPIC is a minimum standard. An independent grievance mechanism is a minimum standard, which the previous Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, James Anaya, in his report on extractive industries, said that there should be grievance mechanisms should be instated that are independent, fair and accessible. So we're not creating new things here. We're not doing things out of sucking things out of a thumb. We're actually doing or reinstating or reaffirming what is actually already affirmed in the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. All right, position paper, this is what I talked about, and bilateral meetings that are being set up today and tomorrow. There's as a team, it is now important, or not team, but as a caucus, it's now important that we set up bilateral meetings for the reasons that I just pointed out. And I think right now, in terms of these, the best way to describe it, and I have to credit Tomo for this one, to how to look at these ministerial process, whereas last week was open, and was available for observers to attend the informal meetings. This week is mostly closed, and we're literally in the dark. We have to figure out through our contacts with parties and through bilateral meetings with parties to figure out what's going on and what the status is of papers. There's a lot of rumors that will be going on. We heard several of them. There's a lot of noise in terms of, well, this is out of the text, this is into the text, and the challenge is to focus on a signal through the noise, to see what's actually what's active intelligence that's actionable than just plain rumors or people just. The thing is, there's a lot of experts out there, and there's a lot of people that claim to know a lot of things out there. So if people want to say, like, I've got the inside scoop, I have a lot of things that I know, and they just want to say things just to sound very interesting. But that is not always the case. So, like, being able to distinguish signal from noise is super important. So right now we're doing that. All right, yeah. So what I was talking about, which I have to credit Tomo for, is the best analogy to describe how things are going right now in terms of like what you can expect from these ministerial negotiations is, and I should say correctly, is that you're actually waiting outside of the hospital, waiting for the doctors or the surgeons to do the procedure on a patient. You don't know what's going on. You just see the patient go into the OR, and you hope that out of the OR, at the end of it, that patient comes out alive. In this analogy, obviously, it's the larger general public and people that are here actually in the D zone and indigenous peoples were actually, outside the OR waiting for the surgeons to perform the procedure on the patient. Question is not obviously, but in this particular analogy, you have 193 surgeons. So they have to think about what is the right approach, and what is to keep the and if the patient is the Article 6 in this analogy, well, what organ are you sacrificing to keep the patient alive? Now, if it's a life and death situation, or what organ are you saving? Are you are you extracting, to keep the person alive? Is it from a indigenous point of view? Is it the heart? That is the human rights and rights of indigenous peoples, or is it something else? So that is something that we've the best analogy that we come up with in terms of how things are ongoing right now. What we're doing right now, obviously. So I'll cut it short. Bilateral meetings, but also if you're interested, I'll send you or show you the one-page document on a position of indigenous peoples in Article 6 negotiations. And also what is important is that we engage with media. There's a one-page document out there right now. I've already had some media engagements today to explain the indigenous position in depth, and I think that is super important to also leverage our contacts at media right now to influence the Article 6 negotiations. That's what we're up to right now. No, not right now. I'm about to leave anyway. That's what we're doing today. Please stick around for the daily debrief number 8, I believe, which will be tomorrow. I don't know when. I don't know what time. But I'm sure that there will be some progress made. And I'm sure that we'll keep you apprised of any developments that are ongoing. Appreciate you joining us for Daily Debrief. Have a great day, evening, or night, or afternoon, wherever you are. And see you tomorrow.